Hi, I'm Noel from Creation Effects with another Creation Lens Flare tutorial. And in this video I'm going to give you a rundown of the 18 main elements that are used to build a lens flare. And it would take too long to show everything you can do with these, so I'm just going to briefly show you what they look like and what makes each one unique. If you need more detailed information about how each element works, you can look in this comments column here and you'll see a full description. And if you don't see this column, you can just right click up here, go to columns, and make sure that comment has a check mark next to it. Now, for each element you're about to see, you have a huge amount of control over, including the brightness, expansion, soften, which is like the blurriness. You can control the color of it. You can flatten an element, or you can stretch it horizontally. And you can rotate it, or you can set it to auto orient so that it always rotates toward the light source. And then you've also got a set of position controls which allow you to make an element move in just about any way that you could want in relation to the light source. And those are the controls that each element have in common. And you'll also find a bunch of other controls on each element that are unique to that shape. Okay, so onto the elements. We'll just start at the top and then work our way down. First we have this light source center. And this is a really basic shape intended to be your actual light, essentially. And typically you would keep this white since it's the brightest part of the lens flare. And I often combine this with the next element, the light source glow. The glow is a solid layer with these three circular masks. And I use the masks to create this exponential gradient from opaque to transparent. So unlike this light source center, which has this linear gradient, meaning this really smooth transition from this light area to the dark area, the light source glow gets brighter and brighter toward the center. And something I found myself doing a lot is opening the masks and changing their feather or opacity. For example, you could open this middle mask and increase the opacity if you wanted to make the center brighter. So that gives you a lot of extra control. And next there's the all-important light rays element. You can really get a wide variety of looks with the light rays, and I used it on almost every preset. And besides having a lot of control over the look of the rays, you can also set the rays to morph shape using this ray evolution slider. And what that does is it makes it so the rays can evolve as the light source moves. And I should mention that you can make any slider controls value change automatically with the motion of the light source using the expressions library down here. But in this element it's already built in. And with the light rays you can also set the completion amount, which hides some of the element and gives it this sort of spotlight effect. And if you check the auto orient box, you can see that the rays line up with the center of the comp. And you can offset that using the angle offset control. And let me add that the completion effect is part of the effects library down here, so you can apply that to any element. Now you may notice that this light rays layer has this layer above it called light rays alpha matte. And there are 4 elements that have an alpha matte layer above it, and you'll always need to copy both layers over to your comp together. So be sure to select the alpha matte layer first and then shift select the bottom layer, otherwise you'll get an error message when you paste them. The starburst element is how you get that familiar star shape that you always see on the sun. And it's got all the controls that you might expect. There's a radius slider. You can control the number of points. And you've got control over the curves. And then if you play with this pucker and bloat slider control, you can give the star some variety. Now onto the halo element. The halo is a ring with this rainbow colored gradient. And you can change that to a solid color by turning on this tint effect down at the bottom here. Or you can change the colors of the gradient by opening up this colorama effect and going to output cycle and then playing with this color wheel. And then up top here you've got some controls that can adjust the spread of the rainbow, or you can do a color shift. And of course you can change the thickness of it, and the soften inner edge and soften outer edge come in handy. And just like the light rays element, you've got this completion slider control. And like all elements, you can move it away from the light source and then use it as a basic reflection. The evolving anamorphic streak is another element with built-in evolution controls. So you can evolve the shape of the streaks automatically as the layer moves. And really, any element can be converted into an anamorphic streak by using the flatten and stretch controls, but this element offers a bit more flexibility. The evolving texture is probably the coolest and maybe most powerful element here, and it's how you create all these little stray reflections that float around, as well as a variety of other textures that evolve when the light source moves. And when you first look at it, you'll see the default texture, which is these sort of streaky boxes. And the texture is made with the fractal noise effect down here, which can be used to make a huge variety of textures. And you would do that just by editing the parameters inside the actual effect. And there's also some basic texture controls up here, like horizontal and vertical scale and brightness. And I'm just going to leave it at the default texture for now. And I'm going to adjust the random seed slider. And I'm just looking for any texture that catches my eye. And it looks like that one has promise. So I'm going to use my mask tool, or the rectangle tool up here. And I'm just going to draw masks around any part of the texture that I like. Okay, now that we're done selecting areas, we don't need this boundary mask anymore. So I'm just gonna go to layer and look for this boundary mask and just delete it. And now you can see what's left is just the areas that we drew masks around. And all we have left to do is to get them to change shape as the light source moves. So we'll just go over these controls underneath this evolution control title, and we'll adjust those a bit. And now you can see when you move the control area, you've got this texture that evolves as it moves around. Okay, let's move on to the grid pattern element. Sometimes reflections like this will appear over the light source in a lens flare. You can control the size of the dots and the space between them, as well as have the grid warp shape as the layer moves using the evolution control here. And next we have the reflection flower. It's kind of a similar idea as the grid pattern, but it creates a grid of this circular shape, which is made using these masks here. And so it looks kind of like a flower. You can change the shape just by editing the masks. And this has some evolution controls as well if you want the grid to warp shape as you move it around. I saw this next effect in a few authentic lens flares, and I just knew I had to recreate it. I called it the rotating warped ring, and it kind of looks like a reflection of a smudged lens, which is rotating and warping shape. And as you can see, it expands as it moves away from the center. And there's a few elements here actually that do that, and with all of them you can control where it starts to expand and how much it expands, as well as what point it fades in and out. And there are some other controls here as well to adjust the warping effect. Now the warped ring is an expanding ring, and you can see that it's not a perfect circle, but it kind of warps its shape as it comes into view. And the ring is made with this mask, which you can always edit if you want to experiment with different shapes. And with this element, you've got the usual warp controls and fade in and out controls, as well as some controls to control the streaks here. The basic expanding ring is very similar to the halo element, but it has the expansion evolution built into it, so it expands with movement. You can reverse the scale direction, as well as control whether the ring is anchored to the light source or detached. And the streaked ring is also very similar, but it uses this alpha matte layer to get this streak effect. And all the controls are the same except for some added controls for the streaks. So that sums up all the elements which I call light source elements, because by default they're all anchored to the light source. You can see they all have this cyan color to them. And in the next video I'll talk about these tan colored layers called basic reflections.